What's up, you filthy casuals? Welcome to Casual Shenanigans Tech, a podcast where normally me and Dave, the Evil Viking 13 from the Casual Shenanigans Gaming podcast, answer your questions about your computer builds, parts, upgrades, whatever, you name it, we answer questions about it. Now, this week, Dave is not joining us because Dave and Joel are at E3 having a ton of fun and seeing lots of new games and whatever else. I actually have barely followed E3 this year other than one or two press conferences because I was swamped with work this week and just could not find the time to actually watch anything. So I want to go back and do that before I look on Twitter too much because I'm sure there were some exciting things that were announced. But it is a rainy, muggy Saturday morning. I have a fresh cup of coffee, cold, which is the best way to drink coffee. And I am going to answer your build-related questions. So for anyone who's not familiar with the show, you write into casualshenanigans@gmail.com. You tell us what is your current build, what's your problem, like is it too slow, doesn't play games enough, not enough storage, or what do you want to do to it, like where are you looking to take this thing, or your question about how you overclock better, or how you get better performance out of something, or whatever. You ask questions, we don't always know the answers, but we tell you what we do know based on our experience. We try to make this as experience-based as possible. Of course, everybody on the internet can have a lot of opinions, but once you get to the point where Dave and I are at, not that we're like experts or anything, but each of us have done literally dozens of builds, whether for ourselves or for other people. So we tell you guys a lot of things just based on our personal experience. So it doesn't always mean it's going to be the ultimate best solution. Chances are someone who's more of an expert in a particular field could come along. If you guys remember the tech podcast about 6 or 8 months ago, we had Ofa on. He's an awesome YouTuber who really specializes in the used parts market, and he knows how to maximize your value for dollar in the used parts market. So we had him on to talk about that because while we've bought plenty of used parts before and we're not strangers to it, we don't have the in-depth minute-to-minute experience in that he does. So we're going to answer questions based on our experience, and I said we, but today that means just me. But before we do that, of course, we got to start the show like we always do with the rig report. And here's where Dave would go, the rig report. So I think the only thing different with my computer this month is my 1 terabyte SanDisk Ultra 2 SSD died, or I guess it's technically a 960 gig. Big difference. It died last month, which really sucked. But fortunately, it was still under warranty, so I filled out all the stuff. It's been about 3 weeks later, and SanDisk has sent me back a new SSD, so I'm going to install it. Other than the form on their website being a bit of a pain in the butt, customer support seemed fine. They didn't really complain or try to get out of doing the warranty replacement, so I don't know what that says to their customer support overall, but I was happy with it. It's kind of interesting that they're seen as a budget SSD maker. I mean, their stuff is cheaper, but when it comes to camera cards, for anyone who doesn't know, I used to be a professional wedding photographer, and the quality of your memory cards is extremely important, and there are a handful of brands that are seen as 100% reliable, and that usually is like SanDisk, Lexar. Some people really swing. Is it Kingston? I think also makes SD cards. I'm not sure. But for both compact flash and SD cards, I always swore by SanDisk. I had anywhere from their cheapest to their really high-end cards, and I've always had great results. Anywhere from 4 gigs to 32 gigs. They've had, literally tens and tens of thousands of pictures written to them in extremely hot, humid conditions over and over and over again, and I've never had any complaints. So don't know what that says about SanDisk SSD line, but I've always regarded them pretty well, and I'm glad they replaced this pretty quickly. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and hop into the questions. If you excuse me, like I said, this is going to be a little bit of a casual episode. I need some coffee. Okay. Our first question comes from AJ. AJ wrote into casualshenanigans@gmail.com, just like you can. And he says, so my build is this, and he sent us a link to his build. So let's go through his build. His build is an i5 3570. I believe it's a 3570K because he mentions overclocking. So it's a 3570, a Asus P8Z68 motherboard, 8 gigs of Kingston RAM, terabyte Seagate Barracuda hard drive, a Radeon 7950. Not only that, but it's a Sapphire. I actually used to own this exact model. Good card. He has a Rosewill Redbone case, a Rosewill 750 watt power supply, and an Asus 23-inch 1080p monitor. So currently, he says, I have it overclocked to 3.8 gigahertz, which is surprising. I don't know why that would be surprising. That's not very much of an overclock. But it's getting older, and I want to upgrade. I want to get a new CPU, possibly the new Ryzen, but that would require a new motherboard. At the time of building, I did not know of PC Part Picker, which it would have greatly been helpful at the time. I'm wondering what would be the best option for upgrading for, say, $400 to $450. It will be over a couple months, so I'll be buying the parts one at a time. SSD is not a priority at the moment. 1080p at 60 FPS would be best. I'm thinking the most money is on a new CPU and GPU. I'm looking at the RX 480 or 1060. It seems Nvidia has been more stable in FPS, but that the 480 is a good bang for your buck. My Sapphire 7950 is overclocked to 1100 MHz. It's been treating me well this far, but I'm getting a lot of stuttering and FPS drops on the newer games. I'm running Windows 10. It feels like a bottleneck somewhere, but I've turned off overclocking on everything. My temps are good on both, just starting to feel sluggish overall. I love your podcast and listen every week. Keep up the good work, guys. Thanks, AJ. Okay, so I'm going to use AJ as an example, not picking on AJ, but use AJ as an example of a way you can help diagnose some of this on your own, because he says he feels like he is getting a bottleneck. He feels like there's a bottleneck somewhere. Well, with a PC, you can know if there's a bottleneck somewhere. Of course, there's going to be there's some unknowns out there, but you can know a lot better than having to wonder about it. Download something like MSI Afterburner. It comes with Riva Tuner Statistics Server, and you can configure, after a few minutes of trial and error, an on-screen overlay that will show you your usage for your CPU, your GPU, your memory, your video RAM, like the speed everything's running at. I think you can even set the speed to some of the internal buses and stuff on the motherboard. It has a ton of options depending on what parts you have in your computer. But the main thing is you can see how much of your RAM's being used, how much of your VRAM's being used, how much of your CPU is being used, and how much of your GPU is being used. And when it comes to gaming, those are going to be the main things you want to look for. There are other things that, of course, affect your performance, but those are the big ticket items. Those together, it's probably 90% of your performance is completely controlled by those. And then at that point, yeah, you can talk about maybe does your RAM speed matter, or your hard drive load speed, or stuff like that. But CPU, GPU, VRAM usage, etc., etc. So in AJ's case, he says he wants to spend $400 to $450 over a couple months. Doesn't want an SSD right now, and he just wants 1080p at 60 FPS. So AJ, you have a 3570. Again, I'm assuming it's a 3570K. Please correct me if that's not the case. You've overclocked it to 3.8 gigahertz. Instead of getting a new CPU, I would see if you can overclock that above 4 gigahertz. I have had a 3570K, and I've overclocked them for a number of other people, and I've been able to hit 4.3 to 4.5 on every single one I've overclocked. Now, of course, you do need a decent cooler, but a decent cooler like a Cooler Master Hyper 212, or there's other similar ones in the $25 to $35 price range. A decent cooler like that is all you should really need for most medium overclocking. And if you could get that up above 4 gigahertz, that'll help stretch it out a little longer. But even if you can't, even at stock speeds, that shouldn't really hold you back in most games. If you're playing something that's incredibly CPU heavy, GTA 5, The Witcher 3 in certain points, Battlefield 1, maybe Watch Dogs 2, your CPU speed will affect it to a degree, and it may prevent you from getting a completely locked 60 FPS all of the time. But even in the Potato Masher with a i5 750 overclocked to 3.7 gigahertz, which is a much slower processor than a 3570K overclocked to 3.7 or 3.8 gigahertz, I'm able to hit, pretty high frame rates, or at least the CPU doesn't prevent me from hitting pretty high frame rates in most every game. So I would leave the CPU alone for now. A Ryzen build would be really cool, like you said, but you could pretty much afford to do a new Ryzen build. Well, actually, for $450, you do a budget Ryzen build because you could only get RAM, CPU, and motherboard. Or you can leave your CPU alone for now and you could get a much better GPU. And that's what I'd recommend, because the 7950 is a good GPU. But that's now, if you're comparing it to modern GPUs, that'll be somewhere around like a GTX 1050, maybe a little faster than that, maybe between like a 1050 and a 1050 Ti if you've overclocked it. Like, not bad cards by any stretch of the imagination, but for 1080p 60 FPS, that's almost guaranteedly your bottleneck. So I wouldn't spend $400 and $450. You could get a 1070 for that money, but you could also get something that's like 85% as good as a 1070 or 80% as good as a 1070. Get an RX 480, 580, or 1060, throw a light overclock on it, and roll with that. That's what I'd do. Between the choice of all of them, it kind of depends on what's on sale at any given moment. So like where I'm looking right now, it looks like 1060s are currently the way to go. 480s and 580s are skyrocketing in price right now. Apparently there's more digital currency stuff that people are using these to mine for. I haven't really kept up on it this wave around, but that's currently what's going on. So your smart money's probably on a 1060, and I'd get the 6GB model just to future-proof you a little bit on VRAM. Those tend to be pretty good overclockers, and their prices have also gone up a bit because of AMD cards being so hard to find. They don't have to be as competitive right now, but on sale you should be able to get one new for $220 to $230 for a 6GB. If you don't want to wait for a sale because you're planning on spending $400 to $450, just get like a $250 one, and you should be very happy with that for years to come. But if you do get a good deal on an 8GB 480 or 580, I mean, there's nothing wrong with those either. Those are great cards as well. So I'd do any of those, and then I would just ride that out for a while longer. You could also consider upgrading your RAM if you want to. You have, let's see, you have 8 gigs, 2 4-gig sticks. You could always move up to 16 gigs if you wanted to, if you have any need for that. But if you're not really using a ton of RAM, 8 gigs should keep you for a while longer. And then I would just save up for farther down the road, upgrade your CPU. But unless you're doing something that's incredibly CPU heavy, you should be able to make this one last for quite a bit longer. So thanks for your question. All right, next email is from Ecko. He says, actually he sent us 2 builds here. He says, my friend currently has a PS4 and wants to get into PC gaming, but he doesn't have the biggest budget. He only has about $600 max, but $500 preferably. He wants all new parts and wants upgradability, which is why I chose the KB Lake platform. Also, the build should include a mouse and keyboard. What do you think of this build that I made? What would you recommend I change about it if there is something to change? I'm going to skip through some of the other stuff he said because we'll get to that on the parts list. But he said, I didn't see much benefit for spending over $50 extra to get the 6GB 1060, which is why I picked a 3GB model since it's incredibly cheap at the moment. Also, do you think Ryzen 3 would be a good option when it comes out? I think yes, which is why I think he should wait for it. Also, my friend doesn't do much editing or productivity work in general, more towards the gaming side. Okay, so the build he's picked out for his friend is a G4560. For anybody who doesn't know, that is the hyper-threaded dual-core Pentium processor Intel put out, which is an awesome value for around $70. A basic B250 motherboard, 8 gigs of G-Skill RAM, a 1 terabyte Western Digital Caviar Blue hard drive, a 1060 3GB Zotac GPU, an NZXT S340 ATX mid-tower case, a 450 watt EVGA bronze certified power supply, and then a gaming keyboard. It's the TechNet Kraken LED illuminated gaming keyboard and mouse set. It has a detachable wrist rest and a water resistant design. It does not say if it was Cheeto dust resistant, but hopefully it is as well. Not saying anything about Ecko's friend, just in general. Okay, so this is a solid build for the money. You're smart. The thing you're doing that's really well is you're going with like an upgradable platform and you're picking the cheapest processor in it, which is totally fine for gaming today. And then eventually, when it's not good enough anymore, it's not going to be a big deal to just pick up a new or used. I mean, at some point the new ones won't make much sense, but you can pick up a used, 7600 or 7500 or 7400 or 7600K or et cetera, et cetera. Pick up one of those processors, drop it in there, and you should be totally fine. Also, if your friend plans on upgrading, yeah, there's no point in spending extra on the 6GB card. If he wants to upgrade in a couple years, sure, get the 3GB if it saves you $50. But if the $50 wasn't a big deal, you could still consider getting the 6 gigabyte one now, and it'll just last you that much longer. So I don't think you can really go wrong either way. But I think this is a pretty solid build for the money. There's a couple tweaks it could make to it, but I really don't think I need to. Like, you seem to know your friend pretty well. This is a really solid build. I could probably slightly beat this for the money, but not really in a meaningful way. Like, you can get a 1060 and a decent processor for gaming and 8 gigs of RAM and a 1 terabyte hard drive for like 500-ish bucks. I mean, go for it. Like, that's a solid build. So on to Ecko's build. He says, I have a budget of $1,250, but that includes an 144 hertz $200 monitor, mouse, keyboard, headset, LED fans, LED strip from eBay. He has two options. He's either going to get a 6600K with a 120 millimeter water cooler and overclock it, or overclock the 1500X using the stock cooler. He picked a 1060 over the 480 or 580 because of the prices these days, but also because it performs better in the titles he wants to play. He also cares a fair bit about aesthetics, which is why he has picked an Inwind 303 with the 4-ring LED case fans. Let me go look at that. I'm actually not familiar with that off the top of my head. What the heck is... He's got the NZXT S430 in his build. Let me see if any of his other builds have the Inwind. They don't. He has the S3430 in all of his builds. So let me Google the Inwind 303 real quick. Oh, that's a pretty good looking case. Yeah, that's a really nice looking case. I'm not really much for cases with windows on them, but that thing looks pretty solid. Well, anyway, he said, would you recommend I upgrade my RAM to 16 gigs because I don't find it necessary at this time, but it's still very easy to upgrade RAM, so I can pull the trigger on that whenever necessary. He wants a semi-modular power supply. What he does care about is that the cables are colored black. He hates ketchup and mustard cables all over the place. And then it says, also, would you recommend the Zyberia T18 because it seems like a great headset. Keep in mind the microphone doesn't matter because I'm getting an external microphone either way. He does a fair amount of video and image editing and occasionally 3D work. So here is, he's got a 6600K build, a 1500X build, and then a list that has the LEDs and everything else in it. So I'm going to read off that list because that has the Ryzen processor in it, and that's the one I think you should go with. So this build is a Ryzen 5 1500X, which is the hyper-threaded quad-core, an MSI B350 motherboard, 8 gigs of DDR4 2133 memory, 120 gig Kingston SSD, a 2 terabyte C8 Barracuda internal hard drive, a GeForce GTX 1060 GPU, an NZXT S340 case, a 600 watt EVGA semi-modular power supply from, well, I already said EVGA, a 24-inch 1080p 144 hertz monitor, an ASIO L70 wired gaming keyboard, and a Razer Death Adder mouse. And then he has the Zyberia T18 headset and other things that go along with that, and a mic and blah, blah, blah. You get all the way down to the end, and that's his build. So your build, I like. I prefer the Ryzen one because if you do video and image editing, sorry, I'm still waking up a little bit, and occasionally 3D work, I think you should definitely go with a Ryzen processor. It will be a tiny bit slower than a 6600K in some games, but honestly in the real world it's not going to matter that much, and for productivity it can be so much better. So I'd go with that. I am going to make some edits to your parts list though. Not very much. It's going to increase the price a little bit, but I will explain why. First thing is, I think you should get a Ryzen 5 1600 with your budget because it's going to be a hyper-threaded hexa-core and it's $20 more. So long term, I think you'll be happier with that, especially for the type of work you do. Next thing I'm going to do is you've picked bargain basement memory, and I am going to get rid of that, and we're going to get you some better memory because Ryzen builds really react well to higher clocked memory. 2133, it's not like it's bad, but it's probably a little slower than I would prefer if I was putting together a Ryzen build. So I am editing that to now include a Ryzen 5 1600 and to include 16 gigs of G.Skill Ripjaws DDR4 3000 megahertz memory. I think everything else about your build looks fine. If I was going to change anything else for my own personal preferences, I would probably get a bigger SSD. I think 120 gigs is a little small, but if you're already planning on just installing your operating system and core stuff on that and then putting everything else on your hard drive, you've probably already thought this through and you don't need that. So Your last question about your headset, the Zyberia T18. For anybody who doesn't know what a Zyberia T18 is, it's like or at least on Amazon, it's like a $50-something. How much is it? It's a USB gaming headset. It's $53. It has blue LED lights on the sides. It has noise isolation, wired over-the-ear stereo headphones with a retractable microphone. I'll be honest. I don't really like gaming headsets. I think that the sound quality is noticeably lacking. I think they're pretty inaccurate. And I wouldn't want to listen to music or anything else on them. I also don't think they tend to be that comfortable or well made. Not meaning that there aren't good ones, but compared to a similarly priced regular music headset, I've just never been that impressed by them. But to be fair, I've never used a Zyberia T18, and the Amazon reviews are overwhelmingly positive. It's got like a 4.6 average on Amazon. So I don't know everything. Maybe this is a great headset. I can tell you what I would do, especially because you are buying your own mic already. He's buying like a clip-on mic. I would get something like Status CB1s. That's a set of headphones I use at work. I really like them for the price. Let me see what they're going for right now. I know they're going to go up in price eventually. The Status Audio CB1s, they are, maybe they're out of stock right now. They sell out really, really quickly. But I really like them. Oh, here they are. Yeah, here they are. They're $80. Status Audio CB-1s. They are not incredibly neutral headphones. I mean, compared to gaming headphones, they are. But to me, they capture most of the good qualities about my Bayer DT770s. But they also have a little more of a fun sound signature. So they give up a little bit of accuracy in exchange for a little more bombast. And they have good sound isolation, and they're pretty comfortable and stuff. So I highly recommend them for $80. But if you only want to spend $53 and you're happy with that headset and everything else, go for it. Like I said, I've never used that particular one. It's just not really my cup of tea to get gaming headsets, because anything that's $53 and is spending money on LEDs and a retractable mic and whatever else, you can believe they've definitely skimped on the audio quality somewhere. But if you're just using it to play games and stuff, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to change it. All right, next email is from Jonatan, although his name is spelled Jonatan. He's from Sweden, so I don't know if that's pronounced like Jonatan. I'm a stupid American. I'm not going to keep going on that. But he says, hey guys, remember me, Jonathan. Oh, well, he says Jonathan right in his email, so yeah, I'm an idiot. It's your friendly stalker. I sent you my very first email, the January 11th, 2014. I've listened to your podcast from the first episode, and I still do. So from now on, I'm going to start to pledge on Patreon to give back. You have given so much to my life. Thank you, Jonathan. He said, I work as a dog handler in the Swedish Army, and with that said, I spend a lot of time walking around by myself in the forest with my dog, but she doesn't talk much. And then it's perfect to listen to you guys. So I sent you an email in January of 2014 about adding an SSD without swapping the power supply. I finally done that. Like you said, it was no problem at all. I have also upgraded my GPU from an Asus 760 to a GTX 1060, and my screen to an Acer XF 500 numbers in a row, 144 hertz, 24-inch 144 hertz monitor. So his specs now are a Cooler Master 690 case, i7 4770K processor overclocked to 4 gigahertz with Cooler Master side on 120V water cooling, an MSI gaming motherboard. I'm going to breeze past the rest of his stuff. He has a 1060. He's got a power supply. He's got a SSD. He's got RAM, 16 gigs of RAM. He has a BenQ 22-inch secondary screen, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so here's the actual the meat of the problem. He said, I recently overclocked my CPU from 3.5 gigahertz to 4, with help from some YouTube tutorials and a lot of reading on different forums. This is my first time overclocking, and I was thinking, what the heck? How much can go wrong with a small overclock and good cooling? Boy, I was wrong. Everything seems to work fine, and I believe I can notice a slightly faster computer. And I start to play some games, CSGO, etc., and everything was working, and the temperature was around 50 to 60 degrees Celsius. So far, no problem. But then I put my computer to the test with Prime 95, and after like 15 minutes, my CPU was hitting 97 degrees Celsius, so I closed down the test. Because I remember a story that Jeremiah told about a time that he and some friend was playing a game, I can't remember, it was Operation Flashpoint Dragon Rising. And something started to smell, and the computer was at a boiling temperature. With that in mind, I don't want to burn down my apartment. I can't really afford that on an Army salary. Yeah, the story for anyone who doesn't remember, me and my friend Chris were playing Operation Flashpoint in college, and we smelled something burning. We shut it down. His Athlon X2 was at 104 degrees Celsius. Good times. His CPU fan had stopped working. So my question is, why in hell is my CPU wanting to fry itself? I thought that with my water cooling, it should be no problem. But when the CPU, it's not working on full load, everything seems fine, no blue screen, yet it's not that often your CPU is 100% load on all 4 cores. So should I be worried and turn down the overclock to original, or is it going to be fine? So what are your thoughts? I'm sending some pictures with his email so you can see for yourself. He sent pictures of his BIOS settings. And maybe you can see what I did wrong, and also a picture of my office setup just for fun. Another smaller question too, how can I get out from my build to swap to a newer and faster RAM? I'm thinking about upgrading to 32 gigs of RAM, or maybe there's no reason to do that because I just play games, no high-end rendering work whatsoever. Sorry for my spelling, and if I am grammatically incorrect, but English is my second language, and sorry for the long email. Greetings from cold Sweden, slap a seal. Do not apologize for your English because you speak English way better than I speak Swedish. And greetings to you as well. So, first question, this is quick and easy. Now, if you're only gaming, you do not need to upgrade to 32 gigs of RAM right now, so 16 is totally fine. The meat of his email, so he has a 4770K, stock 3.5 gigahertz. He is upgrading or overclocking that to 4 gigahertz using a Cooler Master. Let me bring up the side on just so I can look at it. All right, using the side on, so this is a single 120 millimeter water cooler. And let me look up a quick review to see some sample temperatures other people are getting with this. So to answer the main thing you're concerned about in your question, is that temperature normal for water cooling? It is not normal. You should not be hitting 97 degrees Celsius running Prime 95 on anything except maybe the stock Intel cooler, because those kind of suck. Like, that's it. Anything else, you should be getting way, way better results than that. To give you an example, PC Perspective did a review of the Sidon 120V with a 4770K overclocked to 4.5 gigahertz with 1.32 volts on the CPU core. So that is both 500 megahertz faster than your processor and a lot more voltage. And they were still only hitting 81 degrees Celsius at full load. And that's with a lot more on the voltage on the CPU core, which really, that and the CPU speed really crank up your temperatures. So yes, you definitely have something wrong. So let's start with the most likely stuff. So from looking through the BIOS, I am not intimately familiar with overclocking to 4770K, but I do have a 4790K. So there's a lot of similarities there. I didn't see anything that was crazy out of the ordinary, but just to be safe, in every motherboard, there's like a reset to factory settings thing. I would do that, and then I would rerun Prime 95 and see what your temperatures get up to. So if you're running Prime 95 like flat out, I would expect at stock speeds, everything at defaults. With that water cooler, if it's properly installed, you should be getting somewhere around 60 to 65 degrees Celsius. And this is assuming there's not dust caked on everywhere, like the cooler is installed correctly, the fan is blowing, assume all that's working. I would expect to see temperatures maybe as good as 55 degrees Celsius, maybe as bad as 65 degrees Celsius. But if that's the case, you're well within all acceptable limits and you shouldn't have anything to worry about. If your temperatures are still pretty high, I'd say if they're over 75 degrees Celsius at stock speeds, then something is not cooling correctly. My first guess would be that the part of the cooler that goes onto your CPU itself, so in a water cooler, you've got the radiator, you have the fan, you have the tubes, and then you've got that little mounting plate that mounts to your CPU. My first guess would be that is not mounted correctly. So it could be it doesn't have enough thermal paste. Maybe it has too much thermal paste, uneven thermal paste. It didn't make a good seal. There's debris or dust or something that's gotten in there and created more resistance and it's heating up more, stuff like that. So I would probably take that off, clean it, clean the CPU, clean the little mounting plate with something like rubbing alcohol or nail polish remover, something like that. Do a fresh application of thermal paste. Look online for guides on how to do that, and then put all that back together and try again. Something else I would check is the radiator side. The directions that come with your water cooler should tell you what side needs to be pointing out, what obstructions you can have on it, stuff like that. You could also probably look up some YouTube videos of people showing you stuff like that. But you want to make sure it's set up exactly like the instructions say you're supposed to set it up, because by example, if you set it up so it was like sucking air into the case, well, that's not really going to cool that well, because inside the case is warmer than your room. Or if you set it up so you've got the fan blowing like right against like a really heavy grill or something, maybe that could affect it a little bit. I don't think it would affect it to the degree we're talking about here. I'm just saying these are things you ought to look out for. You pretty much want to make sure when you're troubleshooting that you get everything back to pure stock settings, and then start from there. Because if you're at pure stock settings and you're getting similar results to other reviews online, well, that means something went wrong in your process. And if you can slowly work your way back up, you can probably find, what happened. Maybe it was your cooler isn't working like it's supposed to. Maybe you installed something wrong. Maybe you set the voltage too high, whatever. Like, whatever it is, you can probably find it if you're just careful and methodical. But that's what I would do. I would start with absolutely stock settings on the motherboard. I'd run your benchmark again. If you're still getting pretty high temperatures, then you need to make sure your cooler and everything is working correctly, get your temperatures under control, then start overclocking again. When you overclock, if you're not going for a really aggressive overclock, you can leave everything on auto probably and just up your CPU multiplier. Like to get to 4 gigahertz, most of the time you can just up your multiplier, leave your voltage and everything on auto, maybe a tiny bit of an offset on your V-core, and you should be fine. But yeah, start with your temperatures, and then do the easiest overclock possible. You don't need to be setting manual voltages on your RAM and everything else. Like almost all of that can stay auto. Like I've even done that all the way up to 4.5 gigahertz on most processors, and I don't have to adjust anything other than maybe a tiny offset on the voltage. Everything else can be on auto, and it's totally fine. So start with that. Let us know how it goes, and if there's anywhere else we can help you. Next email is from Alan. We'd helped him with a build an episode or two ago, and he says, so it's done. I got the 1700, that's the Ryzen 1700, the motherboard you recommended, which fits perfectly with my current red and black aesthetic, and 8 gigs of Crucial RAM. Very happy thus far, so thanks for your help. He got the whole lot for 491 euros or pounds, including shipping. Good value. Thanks again, Alan. You're welcome, Alan. Next email is from Austo45. He says, do you think disk support is necessary anymore? Do you think disk support is necessary anymore? For most people, no. So you can download a utility from Microsoft that will create a bootable thumb drive for you, so you can install Windows. No games really come on disks anymore, unless you can. I mean, you can get them on disks. You just don't need to unless you live somewhere which has slow internet and you want to kickstart your download by installing most of the game. That's an option. Although with day one patches as large as they are, I don't know how much that helps. But I will tell you this, I have a DVD burner in my case. I've had this exact same setup for, with the case and everything, for 2 years. No, it's almost 3 years now, I think. And I can't actually open my front case door the way I've got it set on a mount currently. And I don't care, because all that blocks is the disc burner, and I haven't needed it. Now, to be fair, I do have an external Blu-ray burner I got for making some family Blu-rays, like of family videos and stuff years ago. That's right, my family videos are in 1080p, as should all of yours be. There's nothing like handing out Blu-rays to your confused grandparents. But I do use that anytime I do need a disc drive, and you can get good external ones for, $30-40. So you could always keep one of those around if you need it, but I think in most cases that it's not necessary anymore. It could be useful, not necessary. As cheap as an external one is, no harm in getting a cheap USB external you can keep around if you ever do need one, and for most everything else you can probably just use a USB drive. All right. Our next question is from Chuck, or Hutch. By the way, Hutch, there is an Arma 3 announcement. I remember you wrote in a while ago. There's an announcement about that coming soon. We actually forgot to put up what we wanted to right before E3, so I got to wait for Dave to get back, but stay tuned. So Chuck says, I listened to the last tech podcast, and I was glad to see more questions about upgrades rather than new builds. My current rig is getting a bit old. I built it in July of 2013. Of course, there have been a few upgrades since then, but the CPU and RAM have remained constant. My current setup is listed at the bottom. His current setup is a 650 watt Seasonic power supply, a Gigabyte Z87 motherboard, 16 gigs of DDR3 RAM, an i7 4770K, a Cooler Master Hyper 212 Evo, a GTX 970, two Western Digital 2 terabyte hard drives in a RAID 1, a 240 gig SSD for the OS, and a 240 gig SSD for games, Windows 10, and a 1080p monitor. So he says, a CPU upgrade will require replacing the motherboard, RAM, CPU, and cooler at a minimum. I've been a bit reluctant to upgrade since my current hardware still plays everything just fine and my CPU performance doesn't seem to be hitting its limits on 2D games. My question for you is related to instructions per cycle or instructions per second, also called IPC for anybody who's seen that in a review. Basically, what I'm wondering is how much of a difference is there really between a 4th gen i7 and a 6th or 7th gen i7 CPU? Will I see a jaw-dropping, noticeable improvement to system performance or just an incremental 20 to 30% improvement? So let's talk about that first before we get to the rest of his question. I would be surprised if you'd actually see like a 20 to 30% improvement in real-world situations. Now, if you're doing like a ton of heavy 3D rendering or heavy video rendering, maybe you will see like a 20% improvement with a 7th gen i7, but that would probably even be pushing it. In the real world of playing games, let's assume you're playing games, doing Photoshop, stuff like that, you're probably looking at like a 5 to maybe a 10% difference between your 4770K and a 7700K. Just being honest. Now again, you heavily overclock them both, you do something that requires like heavy CPU usage, like 3D rendering, yeah, it's going to be a bigger difference, but I still would be very surprised if it was over 30% in anything. So I probably would not upgrade a 4770K, especially if you have it overclocked. I'd ride that out for as long as you possibly can, especially if it's not really holding you back from doing anything now. So he continues, and Hutch says, last August I got an HTC Vive, and that's when I started feeling a real need to upgrade. The GTX 970 works okay in most VR games, but just barely. I was glad to hear on the last podcast that even the Potato Masher saw significant improvements from an overpowered graphics card, even with no other changes to the build. I was ready to pull the trigger on a new 1070 when I ran across a Smith & Wesson 686 Plus in a local store, and I had to spend my budget on that instead. Dave knows what I'm talking about. Now that the 1080 has come down in price, that'll be my next purchase, since that will probably give me the biggest improvement in game performance, especially in VR. CPU upgrade to follow as soon as the budget allows. Thanks, Hutch. Thanks for writing in, Hutch. Thank you for being a listener of the show. Same to everybody who listens to the show. Your 4770K is totally fine, especially with a light overclock. Leave it for now. You can run something like MSI Afterburner if you want to keep an eye on how much your CPU is actually getting used in games. But with rare exception, that should not really be affecting you in games unless you're playing like at 144 hertz or something. Your CPU starts to, get hit really, really hard. But I would not be worried about that at all. I have a Vive. I've played it on the Potato Masher with an i5 750. I've played it on my computer with a 4790K running at stock speeds. I mean, the CPU usage, it's not that demanding with a Vive. I don't think your CPU is going to matter that much. Even for demanding games like Battlefield 1, my CPU is totally fine. Like, I'm not even overclocked right now, and I feel zero need to overclock. I enjoy overclocking. I might go back to an overclock, but I feel zero need to actually do it because everything is working totally fine. I'm nowhere close to stressing the CPU out. Even when I do video rendering, I can still use the rest of my computer fine while it's rendering video. Like, I would absolutely keep what you've got for a long time. If you can get a GTX 1080 for like $450 or $400, I've seen them hit that on sale. I would definitely do that. If it's like $500 to $600, I would try to get a 1080 Ti. But with a Vive, you aren't going to have any problem playing any game with a 1080. I can pretty much promise you that. I've been playing it with a 1080 Ti and a GTX 760, and I've been able to happily play it with both. But you will definitely get better you'll get better performance over a 970 if you have like a 1080 or a 1080 Ti or something like that. So I think you're on the right track. I don't think you need to do anything differently. I would wait on that CPU upgrade as long as you possibly can, and get something a generation or two farther out from here, because I don't think you really have a need to upgrade your CPU right now, unless you're doing something with it that I'm not aware of, but even then, like, I do really, really heavy CPU work from time to time, and my 4790K, which is just barely better than your 4770, mine's still completely crushing it, and I feel zero need to upgrade it to anything else. So my guess is you're going to be fine with that for a long time. Next email is from Loc Gamer. He says, "Hey guys, I wanted to build a PC for work use and keep it cheap, but all new parts. I'm having a difficult time determining what video card and processor to choose. I have an ultra-wide 3440 by 1440 FreeSync, and I want to add a second 2560 by 1440 at 60 Hz for more screen room. I do not do anything extreme on this work computer. I basically run a VPN and do remote assistance. There are times when I have 6 to 10 PCs remoted into at once, and it'd be nice to have more screen room. How do I go about determining how much graphics power is needed for these two monitors, and how does video memory play into this?" He said, "I was considering a GTX 1050 Ti because of the price. I'm not sure how cheap I can go with the processor. If I could put a price on the full build, I'd say $800, including Windows 10 OS. An SSD is not necessary. A 1TB SATA is more than enough hard drive. I'm not sure if this is feasible for the price point. If not, build what you would consider a decently priced machine for the task. For episode 200, I want to see Joel do a video decked out in hipster clothing showing us how to do vape tricks while using fidget spinners." Well, you should definitely go check out Dave's Twitter because I believe there's a picture of Joel using a fidget spinner at E3, and you are welcome in advance. But to answer your question, so I ignored part of what you said, and I'll tell you why. So for a grand total of $733, here's the build I've put together for you, Loc. It has a Ryzen 5 1400, that's a hyper-threaded quad-core, a B350 micro ATX motherboard, 16 gigs of G-Skill RAM. I figure if you're doing a VPN and a bunch of remote assistance and you have 6 to 10 PCs remoted into at once, a decent CPU and a decent amount of RAM should probably help with that. So that's why I included those. I did include a Western Digital Caviar Blue 1TB internal hard drive, but I also included a Western Digital Blue 250 gig SSD because that makes all productivity better. Loading just your SSD and your core programs onto it, like your computer will feel so much more responsive and so much faster with an SSD. It is one of the best quality of life upgrades you can make. Granted, you do not have to do this if you don't think you want to spend the extra money and you've tried an SSD and you're like, not worth it to me, not worth it for this build. No problem. Of course, you can delete it from the build, but that's what I'm sending you because that is what I'd recommend. I've also included a Fractal Design Core 1000 case and a copy of Microsoft Windows 10 Home. So the case, if I was going to make any upgrades, because again, we're under your budget, if upgraded to a Fractal R5, you're going to get a lot of sound deadening. I use an R5. They're extremely nice to build in cases, and mine is extremely, extremely quiet. So for a work machine, that might be really nice. Again, totally up to you and your needs. And then all the other stuff you can customize to taste. But to answer your question, you don't need much VRAM and you don't need a powerful GPU just to run monitors. Like that just isn't complicated in this day and age because integrated GPUs that come with CPUs, those are normally pretty good, or the chipset on your motherboard, or even a very, very basic GPU. So I've included an RX 460 2GB. I included an AMD card because you have a FreeSync monitor, so why not get one that's compatible in case you do want to do some light gaming with it or something like that. Might as well get something that, it all works together. But the R60 or the RX 460 is an $100 card, and it's going to be way more than sufficient for running two monitors. I mean, you could run two monitors on a $30 card. Like, that's just not a big deal. But if you want something that's FreeSync compatible and you maybe want to have the ability to do some light gaming or GPU accelerated video rendering or something like that, the RX 460 is fine. If you're like, no, I 100% will not have need for that, then you can definitely drop that down to a cheaper card. And if I was going to do that, I'd probably bump the case up to be a nicer, quieter case. And, you could upgrade the CPU, et cetera, et cetera. But I don't really know what your VPN uses, but a good quad-core CPU with hyper-threading, 16 gigs of good RAM, an SSD, and a overkill graphics card for under your budget should be everything you need. Now, if you wanted us to include that 1440p monitor in the price, then of course I'd have to respec the build. Let us know, but I think this would do everything you need, so let me know if you need any changes made. Next question is from Nick. He says, "Hello, I have two questions. The first is about general PC parts. How often do you replace things like fans and CPU fans and cases? My PC is about 2 years old, and while it still runs well, it's gotten louder. My second question is likely related to the first. Our house gets dusty fairly quickly. Aside from dusting the PC on a bi-weekly basis, what else can I do? Thanks. P.S. Love your show." Thanks for listening, Nick. Okay, so let's talk about the dust first. Aside from dusting the PC on a bi-weekly basis, what else can you do? Well, just the fact that you're taking your PC apart or just taking the case off, this case side off. Man, I'm still not waking up this morning. Despite the fact that you're doing that, like if that's not enough, taking it off and dusting it out, like that's an awesome start. I might look into getting some CPU filters you can put, or not CPU, man, just not waking up. What are you guys' best tips for waking up on a lazy Saturday when you're really just being lazy? Anyway, back to the question. I have done this before. You can get filters that will go over your fan holes on your case, and that just removes a little bit of the dust from actually getting inside your case. It will get a little louder over time because once those filters fill up with dust, you're going to have to clean them out one way or the other. But I'll send you a link to the filters I've used. You have to mount them yourself using tape or by like putting a fan around them or something like that. But that can be a good way to prevent extra dust from getting into your computer. But then your other question, how often do you replace things like fans and CPU fans and cases? So if your PC is 2 years old and it's getting louder, first things I would check would be dust in your fans or your grills or your filters or whatever else. It sounds like you already do that, so good work. Also, if you have a really dusty house, you could be having dust get into like the bearings of the fans and they might be starting to wear out quicker. It does happen. So for those, I would say if you have a fan that's starting to make a lot of noise, like it's starting to vibrate pretty loud, starting to rattle a little bit, starting to whine, something like that, it might be starting to go bad. Could be dust in the bearings. Could just be a fan that's going bad. I mean, prematurely. It happens. So I'd replace them as needed. Your CPU fan is going to be the big one you want to keep an eye on. If it starts making noise or rattling or anything else, you definitely will want to replace that before it breaks on you. And if you have a decent CPU cooler, it should have a replaceable fan on it. So you don't necessarily have to get the exact same fan, but you could get any fan that's compatible. You know, if it has the same power pins and is the same size and mounts onto it, that's better than a broken one. It could be a nice opportunity to upgrade to like a really nice, like a Noctua CPU specific fan. That could be nice. But yeah, just replace them as needed. So keep everything dust free, put filters in front of them, and if they start making noise, check to make sure they're mounted correctly, like they're not rattling because they're shaking or something like that, and then just replace them once they start to wear out. But there's no like magic bullet for it. Something like a CPU case or wow, my grammar this morning. Something like your case, you really only need to replace if you want one that has newer features. Like if you want to move from USB 2 to USB 3 and you want USB 3 headers on your case, or if you want to get a newer case that has more expansion slots or it has easier mounting things or something like that. Like newer cases will typically be better, but cases can last for 7-8 years no problem. Like you don't have to upgrade them that often. I've upgraded my case twice now. I'm on my third case, and each time it's only been because I wanted features, like different features. It's never been because the case itself wore out. And then fans, I'm still using some fans that I've been using since college. And then I have, so that would be 8 or 9 years ago. And then I also have some fans that are a little bit newer, but I think my newest fan is still 2.5 years old and they're running fine. So as long as you can keep everything clean and something doesn't just break on you because it wears out quickly, you shouldn't really have to replace them all that often. But thank you for your question. Let us know if you have any follow-ups. So Eustace writes in with our last question of the podcast, and he says, "Hey guys, hope all is well. I'm considering upgrading my PC by the year's end, and I love you guys' input as I really think you two know a lot about all things PC Master Race, and I respect your opinions. Thank you. About a year ago, I wrote in asking if I should upgrade to either a GTX 1070 or an RX 480. I also expressed concerns over my processor, which at the time was an FX 4100. I eventually upgraded to what is my current setup, which consists of an FX 8350 and a GTX 1070. I've been pretty happy with this setup. I play most of my games at 4K or 1440p at either high or ultra, or a mixture of settings, whatever keeps me at or around 60 FPS. Anyway, I'd like to keep gaming at 4K whenever possible, and with the recent drop in price of the 1080, I was thinking about selling my 1070 and upgrading. Is this a good idea with that processor, or should I finally jump ship to Ryzen before I upgrade my GPU? I was thinking about a Ryzen 5 1600 or 1600X. Jeremiah always says that processors aren't that important, but the recent YouTube video where he paired the i5 750 with the 1080 Ti, he also said that wasn't the best idea, despite what I thought were great results. I guess my question to that would be, why not? Okay, so I'll stop there and answer his question. So you'll notice in that video, yes, the i5-750 paired with the 1080 Ti was able to get pretty good results in a lot of games. But if you looked at the comparison between that and my 4790K, it also left a lot of performance on the table. So if you're playing at 60 FPS at 4K, yeah, an older processor is going to be able to hang in there. It's absolutely fine. Like your FX 8350, if you're still getting good results, I would upgrade your GPU before I upgraded the CPU for sure, every time. But you could probably expect with your FX 8350, it's not a bad processor, but you're probably going to get slightly worse frame timings than a newer processor. It's probably going to hold you back in a couple really CPU demanding games like Battlefield 1. And by hold you back, I don't mean unplayable. I just mean it won't be as good as like a modern high-end Ryzen or Intel processor, as you would expect. But if you're happy with an 8350 and a 1070, I doubt there's any games, like if you can hit 60 FPS now, or you're close to it, and you upgrade your GPU, there's not going to be any games where you can't hit 60 FPS then just because your CPU is old, right? Like if you couldn't hit 60 before, and it was because of the CPU, you won't hit 60 now. But if it's mostly GPU related and you can usually hit 60, then you're totally fine to just upgrade to a better GPU and keep your CPU going a lot longer. An FX 8350 is quite a bit better than an i5-750. The reason I said in the video the i5-750 wasn't a great idea is because then you're using like a 8 or 9 year old CPU with a brand new $750 GPU. And I'm saying it's not a good idea because it's kind of unbalanced. Like if you're willing to spend that much money, get a slightly better CPU and maybe not quite as good of a GPU, or stagger the upgrades so you can get a good CPU or whatever. Like if I was doing a new build, I wouldn't get such an old processor and pair it with the best GPU on the market, or it was before the next Titan came out. Yeah, just because it's imbalanced and it's not the best use of your money. But if you already have the CPU, there's no reason not to get the better GPU now, and then if you need to upgrade the CPU later, you always can. Like that GPU can go with you, to whatever CPU and motherboard you get. In the same way, you can keep your GPU and get a better CPU, and the GPU will be totally fine with the better CPU and better motherboard. So in your case, I would definitely get the better GPU now if you're playing at 4K, and get the better CPU when you need to. So to continue his email, he says, I'm in the market for a monitor upgrade as well. Would it make more sense to get a 4K G-Sync monitor before making any of these choices and stand pat with my current setup? I'm not familiar with that phrase, but I'm assuming that means keep your current setup. My 4K gaming is done on my 50-inch Samsung 4K set as of now because the monitor I currently use is just a AOC 1080p IPS, nothing fancy. Any input you guys can provide would be great. Sorry this ran so long. Take care. Keep up the excellent work. Thanks for your email, Eustace. So if you're currently gaming on a 50-inch Samsung 4K set, I guess my first question would be, do you not want to keep gaming on that setup? Because that's probably pretty sweet. I would definitely game on that before I'd game on your 1080p IPS monitor, unless of course you want to have it set up at your desk and you can't do that with your TV or whatever. So to answer your question about getting a G-Sync monitor, the question there is, do you not want to game hooked up to a giant TV anymore? Because your options for 4K G-Sync monitors are pretty limited. I have what I believe is the biggest one on the market that's a 16:9 monitor, and that is the Acer Predator 32-inch 4K G-Sync, and I absolutely love it. It is a fantastic monitor, but they are not cheap. I got mine refurbed for right under $800, and list on these, it used to be $1,600, I think it's $1,200 now. So that buys you a really nice GPU, and if you're happy playing on your TV now, I would just get the better GPU and keep playing on the TV and not worry about G-Sync. Like if you only had this 1080p monitor and you were looking to move up to a 4K monitor for your only screen you could game on, and you were like, hey, should I pay extra for G-Sync? I'd say probably yes, because I think G-Sync is an awesome invention, and I really enjoy using it. But with your current setup, if you're happy with that TV, I'd stick with the TV. I'd get a 1080 Ti. I would keep your CPU as long as you possibly can. I'd install something like MSI Afterburner so you can see how much of your CPU is getting used, and when you get to the point where it just can't keep up in games anymore, I'd upgrade to a Ryzen build. So I do all that in that order, and let us know if you have any questions. So to anybody else, listening to this. As always, you can write into casualshenanigans@gmail.com to be a part of the show. For anybody whose questions we answered today, if you have any follow-up questions or you need any revisions, email us back, and we will try to respond to you via email as soon as we possibly can, so you don't have to wait for the next episode. And to everyone else, thank you for watching. As always, you can... or listening, really, because this is an audio-only podcast, even if it's on YouTube. But as always, you can check us out, casualshenanigans.com. You can write into casualshenanigans@gmail.com. Find us on Twitter, @casualshenaniga. As always, it is our pleasure to answer your questions. And until next time, stay casual.